All right, today we're going to be demonstrating how to model in 3D an HVAC system that would be including the ducts, the diffusers for the output, and the actual HVAC system. So we're not going to concern ourselves at all with the return air system today. This is just for modeling the ducts. We're just going to make an assumption that the air is going to return in a plenum above the ceiling, so no modeling required. So just a quick overview for what we're going to be doing today. Number one, we're going to be linking two Revit files together. And this is actually mirroring what would happen in industry. The architect would model a building and then they'd hand that building off to the HVAC designer who would import that into or link that into their Revit model. And then they'll be able to sort of design the system without affecting the building at all. In most cases, the consultants that work for the architect should never modify the building other than the things that they're responsible for. So everybody sort of has their line that they don't cross over on models and in projects like this. Another thing to keep in mind before we get started is that the tools that Revit gives us for creating a duct system, although they're pretty sophisticated, they do leave a lot to be desired. So I just want to lower expectations right from the start. Now, I imagine folks that do this all the time have found workarounds for all the little quirks that Revit has, and I'm not going to be able to give you best practices, but I can at least show you the basics and get you going on how to create this stuff. So let's get started. This is just a practice, so we're not actually going to be doing Module 1 exercise in this demonstration, but you're going to be doing something real similar, just with different files. All right, so the first thing you want to do is download the file that you need to link into your current project, and then we're going to start a new project and give it a name and save it to the same location. First, the file you're going to be using to link into your project is called Practice Model, and that's going to be found on the LMS under the Module 1. So you're going to want to go to the Module 1 area, Module 1 Mechanical, click on that, and then it should be down near the bottom, the Practice Model. Best way to do that would be to right click on that practice model and say Save Link As, and then make sure that you place it in a location that you're going to be able to find easily, preferably in with the rest of your coursework, and then make sure that when you create your Revit model to link that into, that you're putting it in the same location. That's usually the best practice to make sure that that link never gets dropped. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is start a new project. So we're going to say New, and then we're going to have to click Browse here. I don't have it in my shortcuts. We're going to use the mechanical default in this case. Just select that and click Open, and OK. And then just remember, when you start a new project, always good practice, this is true no matter what software you're working in, to just save that immediately. Just go ahead and save it and give it a name. And I'm going to save mine to a folder that I keep all my practice stuff in. And that's under the course folder under Module 1. And I'm calling mine Module 1 Practice 2024. That's when I'm doing this video. I'll just click Save. And it didn't like it because I've got that same file open in another location. Okay, now I've got that saved. I'm going to go ahead and next link in that file we downloaded and saved, that practice model. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the Insert tab for that. We're going to link this file in. So we're going to use the Link Revit tool, and then we're going to locate that practice model file and just click Open. Go ahead and leave the positioning at Auto Internal Origin to Internal Origin. Click Open, and it's going to bring that model in. It's just basically a part of a building. You may recognize this layout. Once we get it repositioned to where we can see everything, let's just go ahead and take a look at this thing in 3D real quick, just so you kind of have an idea what we're looking at. Okay. Now, anytime you link a model into another model, it's always important that you make sure that you get the levels lined up correctly. You can see that it looks like level 1 is lined up with the model and with our current drawing, but level 2 is not, and it doesn't look like there's a level 3 in the model that we link. So let's go ahead and just switch to a south elevation view. And here you can see that level 1, if we click on this thing, that's just showing our current Revit model. If we hover over the building, though, you can see that the entire model that we linked in just sort of acts like a block would in AutoCAD, right? So it's just all one piece. We really don't want to have access to all the individual components within a linked model because somebody else owns that. Somebody else is responsible for making the changes. So we don't want to make those changes too available to the person that's using that model. So just keep in mind we have two things now overlaying each other. We have the individual levels of the current model we just created, and then we also have the linked model in there over the top of it. So we're going to leave level 1 alone. Level 2, you can see that this is the one in the current model. This one highlights all of it, so you know that's the linked model. We want to move this one up to conform. A number of different ways you can do that, but by far the easiest would be just to change the level value to the same, which is 12 in this case. Now we could lock those together, but we're not going to worry about that right now. All right, let's go to level 2 now on the floor plan. Take a look at what we got here. Does this look familiar to you? It should. Probably the room you're in right now. But we're going to go ahead and design an HVAC system. We're not actually going to design it. We're just going to model it today. So we're going to assume that the design work is already done. We're just going to be focusing on actually creating the ducts and the other things. Let's go ahead and bring in the HVAC unit that we're going to use for this. The main air handling unit is going to come in basically just like any other component would, a table or a chair or anything else, and we're just going to place that thing in this area right up here. So for the Module 1 exercise, you're actually going to download a new air handling unit off of the LMS. I'll show you where that's at. Out here under Module 1 exercise, you'll see this ES2 right and left. You can use either one of those. They're basically going to accomplish the same thing. You will also find, though, that this model already has some air handling units loaded into it, and we can certainly use those as well. So I'm going to actually do that. You're going to find everything related to HVAC and other MEP applications on the Systems tab. That's one that we may not have used before. And under Mechanical Equipment, that's where we're actually going to go to import, or not import, but create an instance of that system. So we're going to scroll up and you'll see that air handling units, you have a split system. We're just going to go ahead and bring in this big one right here, number 10. And then you'll see that thing attached to your cursor, and you can just kind of place that anywhere you want. I'm just going to put it kind of up about right here. You can put yours wherever you want. The next step, of course, is to place the diffusers into the ceiling. So we're actually going to go to a ceiling plan now for the second level. And you'll see that there's already a ceiling placed in here. It shows you the ceiling grid. We've already talked a little bit about how to create those ceilings, so we're not going to go through that part. It's already in the linked model. We're just going to place the diffusers that we're going to use into that ceiling grid. So we want to make sure that it's aligned with the grid so that everything works out the way that it's supposed to when it comes time to install. For this, we're going to use air terminals. We'll go ahead and click on that, and you can see that by default, it's showing me this supply diffuser 24 by 24 face with a 12 by 12 connection. Now that particular diffuser may or may not match the design configuration that you're working with. So just keep in mind, we can load additional families in until you get the size that you want. But for this operation, we're going to go ahead and use that one, and then the ducts that come to it are going to size automatically, and it'll already automatically create attachments to it from whatever duct size comes up to it. So we'll just go ahead and leave it there, and then we're going to place that thing into the ceiling. But before we do, we probably should look at a couple of parameters. You can see right now it's coming in at level 2, and it's going to want to place that thing at 0, 0 from the level. Well, that's not exactly where the ceiling is, but we haven't really looked at where the ceiling is either yet. So let's go ahead and just cut a quick section through here and see what we have. All right, so here's level 2. You can see the ceiling's right here, and it doesn't give me a level for the ceiling in this case. We know that level 2 is at 12 feet, and we know the roof is at 24 feet, so those are 12 feet apart, but we don't know what the height of the ceiling is. We need to know that. Probably the easiest way to do that would be just to measure it. So we're just going to measure to the bottom edge, down to right here, and you can see, okay, this ceiling is at 9 feet. Important to know, because that's where we need to place those ceiling diffusers. So let's go back to the ceiling plan. Let's create the air terminals, the diffusers, and let's just change this offset from level to 9. All right, now you can see it, and it is hard to line these things up with the ceiling grid the first time. So really what you have to do for this first one is just kind of click it and place it, and then we'll use the align tool to kind of move it into position. So we'll go ahead and switch to the modify tab, align tool, and we'll just pick this and this. You could lock it, of course, if you want to. This and this, and now that thing is perfectly lined up with the ceiling grid. So I still won't be able to easily create copies of this thing. I'm just using the copy tool. But what you could do is use object snap, and so if you pick this as your first point, then your next couple of points are going to come in also lined up with that grid system. Okay, and you could do the same thing with these 3 once you have them in there. We're going to actually create 6 of these things. I'm just going to copy it straight down. I'm just going to kind of come down to here, and we're going to call that good. At the end of the day, how you get those in there is just really kind of up to you and your preferences. Just make sure that they're lined up with the ceiling grid, and you'll be in good shape. I am actually going to move these a little bit because I noticed I was mistaking this section view for the edge of the wall, and so I crammed them all into this tiny area. So I'm going to spread them out a little bit in this room. So I'm just going to select these 3 and move them down to, I don't know, say maybe here. Maybe I'll move all of them over just a little bit. Kind of get them a little more centered in the room. I think that's going to work for me. All right, so we'll call that good. You put yours where you want. So now that I have those placed, you'll notice that we can't see the air handling unit in the ceiling view. So I'm going to switch back to the floor plan view, and we can see everything in that one. We don't need the ceiling grid anymore, so we're done with that. So the next thing we want to do is tie this together into a system. So what we want to do is select all of these diffusers. You can do that with a crossing window. I kind of like to just say, if I'm in the situation where I want to get all of them in the view, I just right click on one, say select all. Instances visible in view, and that just grabs them all. A number of different ways we can select things. That's one that works pretty good. The next thing we want to click with all of them selected is the duct tool. So we'll go ahead and click on that. You can see that it knows that this is a supply diffuser, so it automatically defaulted to supply air, and then it just gives it a name. We're going to accept the default and say OK. And then now you'll notice that these things all are grouped together. When they're all grouped together, we know that it understands that all of these are being fed from the same duct system, so it's going to automatically route those ducts accordingly. One thing we can do if we forget a diffuser or if we have to add some later is we can actually edit that selection by selecting it again and then just clicking on Edit System. And we're going to use that method to add in the HVAC system here. So what we need to do is select the equipment now. You can see right here that's an option. So if we were adding more diffusers, we would use this. But since we're selecting the actual equipment that's going to be running this thing, we're going to use this. Pick it, and then we say Finish. So now it's all tied together. You can tell because it's all sort of this bright blue color. And now we're ready to start thinking about putting the duct system in. Because Revit knows this is all part of the same system because of the previous step, all we have to do is pick one of the ducts, doesn't matter which one. Even though it doesn't show them all selected, it knows that the system is everything. And now we're going to say Generate Layout right here. Revit's going to come up with what it thinks is maybe one of several possible layouts that you're going to want to use. I would imagine that most good designers are not going to be happy with any of the possibilities. We're going to go ahead and let Revit drive this for us. But in a lot of cases, you can also just keep in mind, manually create all of the ducts in the system yourself. And I'm guessing that that's usually what folks end up doing. All right, but we'll explore some of that in just a minute. For now, let's go ahead and take a look at this in 3D and see what's going on. Okay, so you can kind of tell that this duct is going to come up, it's going to branch out to all these 6 diffusers, but you'll notice that these ducts are kind of at the same level as the ceiling. That's obviously not how we want this thing to be modeled. We're going to need those ducts to come up a little higher and then drop down into the diffusers. It would be impossible to run it through the ceiling, obviously. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we might do that. At this point, you have to be in this design phase right here for this to show up, but you'll get this little settings button right here, and we're going to click on that, and we're going to talk about the height of this duct system, both for the main and the branch ducts. Okay, so the main duct is showing at 9 feet. Let's go ahead and bump that up to 11. We know that the roof is at 12, so we don't want to be too high. We also know that the ceiling is at 9, so we have to be somewhere in between there. We want to be up high enough to be able to give those ducts enough transition space to be able to curve down into the diffusers. We'll go ahead and set the branch at the same thing. And then we'll just say OK. And that all should jump up now. This is a more feasible duct layout now. But if you're not happy with what Revit came up with, you can always toggle through using these arrow keys and just look at some different layout ideas. So you get to kind of choose which one you like the best out of those 5. I think for me, I'm kind of leaning toward this number 2 a little bit. I don't know, maybe I like number 1 a little better. You get to decide what you want to do. All right. So once I'm happy with it, I'm going to click Finish Layout. And just like magic, it generates the ducts for us. Now it's important to remember that the first swipe at this thing is usually not the best because we haven't really adjusted for airflow or anything like that yet. So these ducts can be resized based on some criteria, which is what we'll look at next. To resize the ducts based on criteria, we're going to hover over one of the diffusers, and we're going to tap the tab key until we see the entire system highlight. There it is, and now we'll click to select it all. With all of those selected now, we can go up here to this tool called Duct Pipe Sizing, and we can enter the criteria that we want. Usually the size of the duct is going to be driven by how much airflow is going through it, of course, but the velocity of the air, we want to set a speed limit on that. And what Revit will automatically do is it'll calculate the cubic feet per minute going through that duct and figure out what the size duct needs to be so that it doesn't exceed that speed limit, that maximum velocity that we have set. Okay, so we're going to just go ahead and leave that 1,000 feet per minute, and we're going to leave this at calculated size only. So I'm not specifying a maximum height on this duct, but we probably would, given that we have a maximum ceiling space we have to fit within. We're just going to kind of this first trip through this thing, we're just going to leave the defaults how they are, and we'll click OK. Watch what happens to the size of the ducts. Okay, so they all shrunk a little bit, and you can see that the main duct kind of stayed about the same size, but then those, as it branches down and branches off more and more, the main trunk gets a little bit smaller as it goes. All of the branches are about the same because they're running the same cubic feet per minute. All right, so now what I'd like to do now is just kind of show you that we can actually set the cubic feet per minute limit on the diffuser itself. So let's go ahead and select all of those. I'm going to right click, say select all, instances, visible in view, gets me all 6 of those quickly. And now I can come over to the instance properties and change the flow rate if I want to. So let's go ahead and do that. Maybe go from 500 to say 300 cubic feet per minute. Enter. Nothing changes, but if we go back to the system settings, remember we have to tab to select it all again. And then we're going to go to duct pipe sizing. We're going to go ahead and run that again on it and see what happens to those duct sizes. All right, so you can see they got a little bit smaller. They got smaller because we reduced how much air capacity we wanted to come out of those diffusers. Okay, so now we're going to venture into some territory that I am not 100% comfortable with, but I'm going to do it anyway, and I encourage you to also play around with this stuff. It just fair warning, it can get a little bit frustrating sometimes when you're trying to get it to do something and just not working the way you want it to. But first thing I want to do is show you how to replace these solid ducts with flex ducts. And oftentimes in a situation like this, you're going to have a rigid branch of just a sheet metal duct, and then coming off of that, you're going to have flex duct. So if you want to have flex duct instead of a solid duct, this is how you can do it. First thing we want to do is take off this transition. So I'm just going to select it, hit my delete key on my keyboard. I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to delete all the way down to the diffuser, including this final transition right here. I'm just going to get rid of all of it. And now I want to put a flex duct between this diffuser and this little T right here in the main duct. So I'm just going to go back to my system tab, and you'll notice right next to air terminal you have flex duct. And the trick with adding new duct is you've got to find the connector point, and that's going to highlight with a magenta icon like this. And so I'm going to click that first, and it looks really awkward and quirky at first, but then when I come up here and I find a corresponding point on the duct, I click it, and it's going to generate that flex duct for me. Now never mind that that flex duct looks overly large right now. We're going to go back and resize the system again just to kind of get that back to a normal size. I'm going to go ahead and just do this side also. So we'll delete this and this all the way down to the diffuser again. And we'll just repeat that process. Flex duct from here. Sometimes it's helpful to spin this thing around so you can see the face that you're trying to tie into, and click. All right, now I could do all 6 of these, but I'll spare you having to watch that. You feel free to do it for practice. But I am going to go ahead and resize this again. So I'm going to tab select, tab hover, and then select once I have the whole system. Go back to this duct pipe sizing thing and just run it again. Don't have to change any settings, but everything stayed the same, of course, except for my flex duct, which you saw got smaller. Now it's more appropriate size. So that's a little bit of sort of manual tweaking, but still Revit kind of did a lot of the work for me. It just created the entire length of the duct. It tied it in here. Unfortunately, we are limited on how we can tie ducts into things. For example, if I get rid of this duct and I try to tie a flex duct, say, into the side of this duct, let's see what happens there. So if we go flex duct from here, you'll notice that there's not really a snap point that it gives me. It was just because I was tying into a T that it let me attach into it. But we can't just sort of attach in a random location. If we do, it does really weird things like this, right? It's not even connected to that duct, really. Just kind of hanging off the side a little bit, as you can see. So results vary on how good Revit is at interpreting the things that you want to do. Another example of that is if we lose this duct, for example, how do we manually create a duct again? I'm just going to go ahead and pull this transition off as well. Well, most of these things, if it's a connector that shows up with one of these things, you can actually create a duct right off of that. If we right click on there and say draw duct, it's going to give us sort of this preview of this duct coming out of there. It's way too big, but don't worry, you can resize these things. And then what I'd want to do before I terminate that is just kind of flip it around, make sure that I'm lined up right, and see if I can kind of tie into this other duct. Now it's not giving me anything, it's not giving me a preview at all. There. That's the other sort of quirky thing. If you're zoomed in too close, you'll never get that snap point. But if you zoom out and you just try it a few times, you'll finally hopefully get that to show up like I did just there. It just really takes a lot of trial and error. So now I've clicked that second point. You can see it kind of resized everything awkwardly. This duct is way too big, but just remember, tab, select the whole system, duct pipe sizing, okay. And then everything kind of comes back down to a normal size. Okay. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? How about this? What if we have to move our diffusers after we've created our duct system? You're going to get mixed results, and it obviously maybe depends on the type of connector you have. You can imagine that this flex duct is probably going to do a little bit better with adapting to that change than this solid duct is going to. But let's go ahead and take a look. We're going to go to the ceiling plan view. I'm going to go ahead and just select both of these ducts. We're going to move them each over one grid. So I'm going to click move, pick this as my base point, this as my finish point, and you can see that, oh, well, what it did here was it actually moved this one too. And I didn't know that was going to happen actually. You can see this one moved independent, but this one I did not ask to move. In fact, I didn't want it to move. But rather than rerouting the duct, Revit just decided to move them both over, which is interesting. And I imagine in real life, that's probably what they would end up doing. With a flex duct, you're certainly not bound to that on both sides. All right, one last thing, and I'll leave you to getting busy with trying to make that Module 1 exercise work for you. I want to switch to a 3D view and just kind of talk about tying into the HVAC system. There may be a time where you actually need to kind of reconnect things. You'll notice that I just went ahead and pulled this duct, deleted the top off and pulled this duct back. One of the options that we have when we're talking about connecting into things is a tool called Connect Into, of all things, right? And we don't get this with every object type. For example, if I click on this trunk right here, I don't get Connect Into in my ribbon, but I do get it when I select either a diffuser or the HVAC system itself. So it has to be a non-duct item, I guess. But you'll see right here it has this Connect Into tool. So I'm going to go ahead and just try this and see what Revit comes up with. Click Connect Into, and it's given me this select connector. I would rather just pick it manually, but I'm not seeing that. Return error, cancel. And it may not let me do this. I'm not quite sure. I want to select this out one. And I don't think it's going to let me use that tool for this. Let me just try one more time. Connect Into. No, it's given me this whole thing. And it won't let me pick anything else. Well, let me just try this. Okay. And now I get to pick the object I want to connect into. Let's see how good it does. Oh, and it actually did really well. So it connected into that duct. You'll notice that it waited till right here to make that downsize transition. But just keep in mind that at any time we can select that whole system and resize it according to the airflow that it needs. So I'm just going to do that real quick. Tab select, sizing, okay. And it changed that to where the transition happens now back at the base like before. So that Connect Into for this, because there's so many connectors, I think is why it gave us that reading or that dialog box. We have to select which system within that that we wanted to connect to, and we just wanted it to be the supply air in this case. The best thing you can do at this point is to just go through and play around with stuff, delete sections out and attempt to reconnect them with new ducts. Swap out the square with the flex duct like I did, see if you can get that to work. Try moving some ceiling diffusers around once it's connected. Definitely practice in having the system resize those ducts according to the airflow and the CFM associated with the diffusers. If you have trouble with any of that, feel free to reach out. We can certainly do some one-on-one stuff if necessary. Otherwise, just kind of have fun with this. Enjoy it, hopefully, and get to experience a whole new aspect of Revit doing this stuff. Happy modeling. We'll see you next time in class.